I discovered what bisexuality was quite young, when Green Day's lead singer and guitarist Billy Joe Armstrong said that he was bisexual in an interview. And I said, wait a second, that's me. Like, I've never heard that word before.
Today is the 29th birthday of bisexuality. We're filming this on the 18th of July when Newsweek declared that bisexuality existed. So I think a lot has happened during that period.
This is Give It To Me Bi, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything from a bi plus perspective. I'm Chad Barnier.
And I'm Steve Spencer. Together, we're diving into the real stories, the challenges, and the celebrations of the bi plus community. We are here to learn together and, of course, to laugh together.
From personal journeys to cultural moments, we are here to amplify a bi plus point of view and spark conversations that matter.
So, whether you're bi, pan, queer, or just curious, join us as we explore the world of bi plus experiences.
Now, let us give it to you bi.
All right, welcome back to Give It To Me Bi. Today we are diving into the world of activism and advocacy, and I'm already stuffing up this intro. Thank goodness we are doing a second take on it. Tonight we'll be focusing on how bi plus individuals are making waves and pushing for change right before our very eyes, building on the legacy of incredible activists before us. We'll be covering bi activism in history, modern bi plus advocacy, and of course some challenges and strategies as well for our lovely, wonderful, awesome, biconic listeners and allies.
Oh.
So Chad, welcome.
Welcome. Episode 2. Here we are. A topic that is very close to our hearts. This is how we met. We met through activism and advocacy circles and connecting with community. So I have a very deep soft spot for this topic of advocacy and getting out in community. And I get to meet wonderful people like yourself and all the other people that we know. What's been your experience of getting into bi advocacy and activism?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as you. I've met the most incredible people like the wonderful Chad, who I'm now hosting a podcast with. You never know where these sorts of connections take you. And in a way, the advocacy and activism that I've been involved in throughout my whole life, it's saved my life in a way. It's given me purpose because I've got a day job, and that feeds, that pays the bills, but I need something to feed my soul as well. And I find that the advocacy that I do is just the best way for me to connect, to give back. I have a great deal of privilege, and so I want to be able to use that to help people and, do whatever I can to make my little corner of the world at least a little bit better.
I love that. Something to feed the soul. That's beautiful. I totally agree. I feel like not everyone is built for advocacy and activism. We are very loud and proud drum bangers. We bang the drum, right? We're out in the streets kind of talking about bisexuality and our community a lot. But not everybody's built for it. Not everybody has maybe the stamina, the kind of personality to kind of take a hit and still move forward with love and kindness and care, which is hard. It's hard for everybody involved in advocacy.
It's hard for us.
And yeah, absolutely. Right. And there's we're going to probably get to this a bit later. There's very little to no resources available for the bi plus community in that advocacy space, and so you're always kind of working uphill. But like you said, you mentioned this idea of privilege, and I totally agree. If you have some form of privilege or have some areas of strengths, I think it kind of is up to you to, if you have the capacity to use that and use it for something you care about, and hopefully something that you can make a change and a difference in. And we both found ourselves doing this and all the other things that we do in this space because we identified that that's kind of us.
Yeah, I sort of take the same outlook. You mentioned this. I take the same outlook with advocacy as I do sort of with coming out or anything. It's like, if you can, then you perhaps should. That's the way that I looked at it for myself. I'm like, I can do this. I have the privileges to. I have the confidence to do this, whether it's coming out, whether it's to advocate for my community. And so I really felt a duty to do it. But then at the same time, as you've mentioned, there are so many personal reasons why people can't or won't or unable to get into advocacy. And I don't know about you, but like at the end of the day, we do what we do so that people can just live their lives. We don't, so that people don't have to be drumming and, you know, flying the flag. As you know, as much as I love flying the flag, life is not meant to be a fight. And we've still got so many fights ahead of us, which we get to talk about.
Yeah, and I mean, I come up against the question from well-meaning people who might not be in a community that isn't well represented or doesn't have resources, that kind of thing. Of why do you have to be so loud about this? Why can't everyone just live their life and just get along and be kind to each other? Which, look, I think every advocate or activist out there in the world for whatever cause that they're doing it for would agree. Would absolutely. Let's do that. If it was possible, right? We don't live in fair society a lot of the time. People don't, there is not equity across different communities. And that's why we fight. And that's why we have these conversations, because there is still a long way to go. So the idea of saying, hi, putting your hand up, I'm bisexual, I'm pansexual, I'm omnisexual, whatever it may be. You're a bit of a lightning rod, a lighthouse. You mentioned last episode being a Bi Lighthouse for people, because it's a way people can connect, can get to know themselves through other people and see, hey, I'm not totally alone in this existence, in this life. And maybe this thing that is quite core to who I am. Someone else can see that for the first time ever, perhaps, or maybe just I like some friends with some commonalities. That would be great as well.
Yeah. And something that's really unique, I think, for Bi Plus advocacy is we're constantly battling against the common myth and misconception that we don't face discrimination, that we don't face challenges. And all it takes is one glance at any mental health statistics, sexual health statistics, to see that there are huge inequities between us and other queer people. And so that's a good reason for us to be fighting. But then also, you know, I've had more than a few times running around with my bi flag at a pride event or somewhere, or I'll be wearing a pin to somewhere, or, you know, I have my bi sweat towel, which we saw last episode, which has been washed. Since that episode.
Thank you. The episode hasn't been published, but I'm sure there are people writing in, making sure that you're going to wash it soon.
Yeah. And because, like, you know, for example, the gay community went through their period of liberation a while ago. And so there are different schools of thought that, you know, are we in a post-gay liberation period? You know, what does having marriage equality mean? Whereas for us, we're still building community. We're still building visibility. We're actually still trying to prove to people that we exist. We're decades behind the gay community. And so when I'm flying that flag, you know, people think that it's really twee, but I'm like, no, we are at the point where we actually need to be flying our flag.
Yeah, totally. Interesting that you say gay liberation, because the movement for a long time was called gay liberation. And during the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, gay liberation was an all-encompassing term. It meant this community of particular outcasts, right, or non-heterosexual people. And so bisexual people fell under that banner, but weren't explicitly a part of that community. So now when we have... Yeah, absolutely. We benefited at like a rising tide lifts all boats. I think that equity for some helps equity for all. I wholly believe that. And, but then what happens when we get certain wins on the board, when it comes to, say, decriminalization of homosexuality or, gay marriage, all that kind of stuff, is we start to get rid of the to-do list and perhaps, the people who are kind of roped in or assumed to be a part of the community and aren't necessarily explicitly a part of the community, maybe their needs aren't on the to-do list because the to-do list doesn't exist anymore. It kind of points to a way forward of like, okay, who's missing out? Who fell off the list? Do we need to reinstate that list, write a new list?
There's always a new fight. Now, Chad, we missed our banter. We went straight in. We went deep in. So I'm bringing a little bit of banter in now because I had a very late Pride Month delivery come in of my badges.
Oh my gosh, so fun.
We're now filming in the middle of July, so I'm a little bit late for my Pride Month merch to be coming in. So I got this one.
I love that we have a podcast show and tell. This is great. What does that one say?
Chaotic bisexual.
Yes, that's
I'll do
great.
floats away. You can see that there. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah. And then my favorite one, the bisexual trash raccoon. This one I have a particular affinity for.
Yeah, of course. Which part? The trash or the raccoon? I could guess.
Oh. Are you asking a bisexual to make a choice?
There we go. Yeah, so one, I didn't get any Pride merch this year, nor do I typically get Pride merch. I got some a few years ago, and it is some of my most worn clothing. It's all wrapped out. Probably not appropriate to wear anymore because it's full of holes. So it sits on my pile of things to sew to other things. So I've got certain designs I want to put on jackets and stuff. I need to update my Bi merchandise.
Yeah. I mean, we all do.
I need to buy more.
We definitely need to we'll put a sound effect in
there. Yeah. Okay, so I have a question for you. So what would your journey to bi advocacy and bi activism be? Were you involved in kind of an advocacy space before bi advocacy? Were you particularly an impassioned child or someone that kind of banged the drum for things outside of yourself when you were younger? Or was this journey direct to bi advocacy and you mentioned before, a part of your coming out?
Yeah, no, definitely didn't grow up this way. I was a little wanker. For our overseas friends, that's a dickhead. Yeah, no, I didn't really have any thoughts of what was happening outside of my own life and my own little world. And then getting into my 20s, I realized there is a world out there, and I am part of communities that do actually mean something to me. And so my advocacy started really in HIV. 10 years ago was the 2014 Melbourne AIDS Conference. And I went on to my first ever public march rally. Like, I'd never marched on the streets before. And it was for the rights of people living with HIV, because I had friends who were living with HIV. At the time, I was HIV negative. Plot twist, I'm not HIV negative anymore. And sort of feeling that energy. And then I looked, and I tell people whenever they want to get into advocacy, I get these questions a lot. You probably do too. You know, how do I get into it? And I say, look, a really great starting off point is to look at your skill set. And my skill set at the time was in research and social media, really, back in those days. That was Facebook. And so I combined all of that and co-founded my own little grassroots community organization called PrEP Access Now. And through that, we became the world's largest private provider of PrEP, the pre-exposure prophylaxis, the HIV preventative pill. Just from there, that's, like, you sort of get a taste for this sort of stuff, and you can see the impact that individuals can make. And I was surrounded by individuals who didn't have a lot of resources, who just had an idea and perhaps some good luck. I certainly feel like I had a lot of good luck, and you can actually create change. And so from that, then, you know, in my coming out in my mid-20s, it didn't start off as activism or advocacy. It just turned out that I wanted to come out, let everyone in my life know. So pop it on Facebook. And from there, people were like, okay, like, I sort of feel like I was picked out of obscurity in sort of a way. It was you and our friends at the City Bi Plus network who really went, hey, you have something to contribute. Would you like to come and be part of something? And that was just the most meaningful thing, because especially when you come out as bi, you have all this imposter syndrome. You genuinely, if you haven't been part of the bi community, you wonder, is there even a bi community? It's a question I'm always asked. I'm like, yeah, there definitely is. And so to be welcomed and embraced and viewed as a whole person, and to be able to apply my skill set, was the most valuable thing. And that sort of brings me to how I met you. And so how did you get into the advocacy around the space?
Yeah, I didn't grow up, obviously, banging a drum, but I did grow up a very passionate child. My mother is a very heart on your sleeve kind of person, and has worked tirelessly my whole life in non-for-profit spaces. So working for places like the Red Cross and working for different cancer councils and working with some disadvantaged communities. And so I was always kind of taken with, or just found very natural to kind of have this empathy towards other people, until I realized that I have massive blind spots. The world isn't the way that I picture the world to be. And I remember very clearly my partner moved to Sydney, and I'm from Canberra, and I won't apologize for it. So my partner moved to Sydney. Beautiful. Yeah.
Wait. That reminds me of, do you know beautiful gowns? Beautiful gowns.
Gowns. Beautiful gowns.
Gowns. Beautiful gauns.
That's great. I love that.
Listeners will know the reference. Yeah.
Gown. Beautiful gowns. I'm going to start saying that Canberra from now on. That's literally perfect. So I remember very clearly visiting my partner one weekend. She had moved in with a good friend of ours, and the TV was on, and there's a conversation happening around the gender pay gap. And I was quite young and quite naive, and I was like, oh, well, that can't exist. That would be illegal. Like, you couldn't legally pay someone less, right? And in that moment, something like, it was this very powerful exchange. My friend, the person my partner was living with, very gently kind of like walked me through the idea of the gender pay gap and explained all the ways that it manifests. And it completely changed my life. I just remember looking at the world being like, oh, there's different colors. Like, it's not exactly what I've always known it to be, and it shouldn't be. But now that I know, I now have this responsibility to turn over all these different stones and all these different leaves to see if that is the truth, or if perhaps my biases and my lived experience is telling me some kind of falsehood, or perhaps the media or life, right? Or growing up as a cis man, if those things are impacting those things as well. And it was a bit of a paradigm shift. And I remember then really rallying around other causes that I cared about and people I cared about. And I remember reflecting on, why was it so powerful? And for me, and this might not be the case for everybody, I know some people might take unction with the idea, but she was very gentle and thoughtful and empathetic in her delivery of the message, right? Of why you should care about this thing. And this is, perhaps you don't know. She didn't call me stupid. She didn't call me dumb. She didn't belittle me in my limited understanding. She is the person that is most impacted by my naivety of that topic. Yet she still had the empathy and the kindness to educate me about those things and have that patience. And it really just hit me like a ton of bricks of like, wow, that's what change looks like. And so in my engaging in the different things that I care about in advocacy spaces, that became a bit of a mantra to me of like, lead with empathy, lead with education, lead with assume the best in people. I try to assume that people don't mean to harm people. A lot of harm is accidental or incidental or just naive. And so that's what I try and do. And like, there are times where you get passionate, you get angry, and you get loud. Sure. That doesn't mean that doesn't come from empathy. And perhaps that comes down to more tactics, not the advocacy itself. But that really kind of woke me up to advocacy in its kind of most primary form. But then I recognized my own journey with bisexuality. And I, to myself, have always been out, right? I discovered what bisexuality was quite young, when Green Day's lead singer and guitarist Billy Joe Armstrong said that he was bisexual in an interview. And I said, wait a second, that's me. Like, I've never heard that word before.
When was that?
Yeah, there was an interview, someone asking him about a song. Maybe it was about King for a Day. There's a song about doing drag in your mother's clothes when she's out of the house. And then said something about, quite flippantly, and about being bisexual. I was like, oh my gosh, like, of course, that makes so much sense to me now. And so to me, I had always kind of been, I was 14 maybe.
Okay.
So
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, maybe 5-6 years ago. So almost 20 years ago, right? Yeah. And in high school, I was a little emo kid, and a lot of emos. I'm not sure if they're experimenting or whatever as a teenager, but all my friends were bi. right? So like it was just like the default was like, look at us bi kids wearing our skinny jeans and our eyeliner. Then as I grew up, I began going to church and I stopped talking about that part of myself and recognized that a lot of my relationships didn't have a full picture of who I was, not because I was hiding it, but I just wasn't, like I was saying before, banging the drum. And I recognized that one, that was doing harm in that relationship because it wasn't fully truthful or authentic, but it's also doing harm to myself. There's a part of me that I wasn't celebrating and owning. And I took that as a bit of a rally cry to, I needed this from somebody when I was 14. Why aren't I doing this for someone else when they're that age? And I've recognized that has made a really big difference in my community and people in my life and to keep going.
Yeah. Speaking of your Green Day moment, today is the 29th birthday of bisexuality. We're filming this on the 18th of July when Newsweek declared that bisexuality existed. So I think a lot has happened during that period.
I had no idea where you're going. I was like,
my DMs have been full of this.
I thought you were about to say, anyway, I thought you were about to derail everything we've ever worked towards. That's great. Yeah, so we've only been around for 29 years, and it's that's so funny. That Newsweek article, infamous. If you don't know
totally.
Was it 1993?
Whatever.
No, 1995.
29 years ago was.
Yeah, sure.
It was 29 years
Newsweek, a very dramatic front cover saying the new sexuality, and of these very depressed, very serious, solemn-looking young people.
Yeah, just like sort of shadows like this.
Yeah, a lot of shadows, dramatic lighting, contrast.
We should recreate that photo. I think we should.
Oh my gosh, that should be the podcast artwork. Imagine.
Okay. Speaking of history being made, listeners, you are witnessing history being made. I think that's it.
Wow, that's hilarious. Wow. Okay. My creative brain is ticking. And I mean, I guess kind of going back to something you said before is like using your strengths. You don't have to try and be a different person or gain some new skill to be an advocate.
You study something, you work somewhere.
Yeah.
You have a certain skill set, you're a type of art that you're skillful in. Apply whatever you have at your disposal and use that. It's like I have people who, not to like slag on people who like work in banks or work in middle management or something, like, I just have a day-to-day job. What difference can I make? Like, you can make a huge difference. You work at a large organization, get involved in their Pride network. I bet you that Pride network doesn't have much bi visibility. Yeah. Be that visibility. You could be a revolution for a whole organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I just recognize working in community, right, is there are a lot of skill gaps and some areas that community would love to have certain skill sets. Are you great at grant writing? Oh my gosh, come along to Sydney Bypass Network, come along to some kind of community group and let's write some grants together and get some funding for our community. Or are you really good at budgeting because you work in finance? Awesome. We could use you as a treasurer.
Management. We need a risk manager. Like,
oh my gosh. Well, are you great at events? Like, tell you what the bypass community needs. We need a year-round calendar of events so people can see that there is community. We don't want to just be one float at the Pride March in June or in February. We need all the skill sets, and so lean into what makes you you, and then turn up that way. We don't need more Chads or more Steves. We need more you.
We need less Steve. I need to retire. Put me to pasture, please. I've been a talking head for so long.
I reckon once a week someone messaged me on Instagram and says, "Can we see less of Steve, please, somebody?"
No, I've got plenty of go in me. But one thing that is important to me as an advocate is to actually nurture and build the capacity of the next advocates. Because it's like I've started a few organizations of my own, knowing full well that I will not have the capacity beyond a couple or a few years to be able to run them. Like the Bi Positive Advocacy Network, the world's first national network of HIV positive Bi+ people. And so I started this organization under the auspices of our peak national HIV body, knowing full well will need people to come in and create, like, make it their own as well. Because one thing I have found, and another thing with advocacy, is to understand your style. And there are people who are like the workhorses. They can really get the stuff done and really put the work in. Or people like me who are sort of like really great ideas people. I will come up with a fantastic idea and sort of light a spark, but I'll need people to carry that torch from me afterwards. You know, we all sort of have a place to play. So even if you're like, oh, I can't come up with like a revolutionary idea, we don't need that. Like, we need...
Yeah, we're not looking for revolutions.
Yeah, well, we need...
Well, we're looking for our revolution. but
a bivolution? We'll work on that one.
Yeah. So, welcome back from the break. We thought we might take the opportunity to talk about advocacy and activism as it pertains to our history, right? How has bi activism played a part in perhaps the wider LGBTQIA plus space, which we kind of touched on last week when we talked about Pride. But there are some significant milestones and achievements and different people that have popped up throughout time. And this would be a really great opportunity to highlight and honor those people and those milestones.
Absolutely. And there are historical figures, and something that can also be really difficult when looking back in our history, and it's the same thing for lots of queer history, is the notorious they were just roommates. So we don't necessarily have an accurate representation in historical records of who were visibly bisexual back millennia. But
can I say, I'd love to do an entire episode on that, because I take unction with that. Because we don't doubt that people were straight in history. We don't doubt that people were gay in history. The second that there's any kind of ambiguity, it's like, oh, how dare you ascribe modern day sexuality and language to people from history. I'm going to park that thought right there. We're going to pick up on it on another episode. But I've had this argument with a few people previously, and it really kind of gets my goat. Please continue.
So, you know, in the 20th century, of course, we saw a massive emergence, the late 20th century especially, a massive emergence of bi plus advocates across the world. And then as part of broader queer and gay liberation, we saw some really large names come out of North America. And then we're still seeing today more and more advocates, public figures being out, speaking up, contributing. And, you know, we're looking back in this segment, but I'm really looking forward to the next one, where we get to talk about what's happening now and what's going on in the future. But we, of course, stand on the shoulders of giants here. So, Chad, give us a couple of your most iconic bi plus.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, one of the most glaring ones that we spoke about last week is Brenda Howard, the mother of Pride, the person who organized the first Pride marches and continued to organize Pride marches ever since Stonewall. I come from a creative background, and I'm a musician, and I played music my whole life. So there's a lot of bisexual icons that I look up to in that space, from David Bowie, Freddie Mercury, I said before, Billie Joe Armstrong from Green Day. But we have people like Billie Holiday and Lady Gaga, and people who, I mean, Lady Gaga's an interesting one. It's always called an ally, right? And like, you are a part of the community, yet you're outside of the community all at one time. So I have a lot of creative people that I look up to, and I love that they're loud voices for us. There's this really famous interview with David Bowie where he's been quizzed on his sexuality. Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah. Really, really stoic and strong in their assuredness, when the person interviewing them was so wishy-washy and like, oh, come on. You can probably say a bit more. You can probably say it a bit better than I am.
Yeah. Yeah, the quote was really interesting. So the interviewer, this is surely it's back in the 70s. The interviewer said, like, you've been asked about whether or not you're bisexual. And David Bowie said, yes, I have. Many times. Too many times. And the interviewer then says, but you've never quite answered it. It's like, well, no, I have. I'm bisexual. That's enough. It's like, well, what does that mean though? Like, does it mean that you really are, or that like you're keeping something secret? And he's just like, I've answered your question. I don't need to say anything else. You asked me. I said I am. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And that was in the 70s. That's, oh my gosh, 50 years ago.
Awesome.
So it's like a bit of a watershed moment for sexuality in media and entertainment. I think it would be silly not to mention some activists, but then some people who might not be considered an activist, but have definitely influenced the community. So an activist would be Sylvia Rivera. So Sylvia was a bisexual trans woman who was a key figure in the early Pride movement and a key figure in Stonewall riots as well. From memory, was a co-founder of STAR, which is, I'd want to double check, but it's an organization for advocating for the rights of, actually, you know what? I'm going to double check that because I'm going to get the language wrong and I don't want to get that wrong. One of those people would be Sylvia Rivera. So Sylvia Rivera was a key figure in the Stonewall riots and the events that occurred there and after. Very vocal, some people say divisive, but it's a bisexual trans woman who had founded an organization called STAR, which is the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, and was a really vocal, very active, a very loud figure for the movement of queer rights, especially for sex workers and people of trans identities as well. One of the other figures I wanted to talk about a little bit was actually Alfred Kinsey. Now, I know that in bisexual spaces, Alfred Kinsey and the work that he did in the reports and the Kinsey Scale can be a bit controversial or a bit divisive because it's not entirely accurate to people's experiences. However, it really changed the world in terms of defining male sexuality. So Alfred Kinsey was responsible for the Kinsey reports. He was an American biologist, a professor of entomology and zoology, and through doing that work and kind of not getting funding and not making the waves or the impact that he had aspired to, found himself looking into male sexuality. He himself, I'm not sure if identified as bisexual, but had experiences and relationships with people of multiple genders, and then had put out a report called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and then the next decade put one out about human female. But essentially, what that came to was the creation of the Kinsey Scale. So this was a scale 0 to 6. So at 1, you are wholly heterosexual. At 6, you're wholly homosexual. And everyone else is on a sliding scale up. And so in the middle, you have 50-50. Heterosexual, homosexual, and then there was a lesser amount and a greater amount. Surprisingly, actually, there is a 0 point on that scale. It doesn't start at 1, and this is for people who don't have a sexual attraction. So believe it or not, some kind of representation for asexual people before we had that language, and I guess pretty revolutionary to have that acknowledged so early. So this is 1948 that this is happening, this study. And so Kinsey's work really revolutionized and was really highly influential in contributing to the sexual revolution. People learning to discover their sexuality and recognizing that you don't have to exist in this binary. There is area in between. And as we've discussed before, and we'll discuss again, bisexuality isn't plotted on a map between gay and straight or homosexual and heterosexual. It's not a linear scale that we plot ourselves somewhere along that. But at this time, that idea was pretty revolutionary, and it gave people this freedom to talk about themselves in a different capacity and live their lives in a different capacity as well.
Yeah. And just to follow on from the Kinsey Scale, it was so formative when it was formative for decades and decades. And then more recently, we've had things like the Klein Grid, named after Dr. Fritz Klein. And so in 1978, Dr. Klein wrote the book, The Bisexual Option, and came up with the Klein Grid. And it's more of a nuanced way. If you think of the Kinsey Scale as a two-dimensional way of understanding sexuality, which for its time, we came from a one-dimensional understanding of sexuality to now actually understanding it. It's a much more diverse and on a spectrum. The Klein Grid sort of takes it to the next level. It's literally a three-dimensional view of what human sexuality can look like in a much more nuanced way. So Definitely read up on the Kinsey Scale and read up on the Klein grid. That's Klein with a K.
Yeah. And we might put both of these on our website in the episode link. It's interesting to see how these things are plotted out. And so obviously the Kinsey Scale is quite linear and pretty rudimentary. And the Klein sexuality grid it talks about experience, and it talks about your, not necessarily experience, but your attraction, your behavior, your fantasies, your preferences, a whole bunch of different types of category of your experience as a bisexual person or as a sexual person. And then you would rank them as well from either heterosexual only, homosexual only, those types of things. And so it's interesting to see how people start to talk about bisexuality in terms of experience, self-notification or self-ascribing their experience, because there have been some really quite controversial and really quite disgusting methods of trying to figure out bisexuality over the years when it comes to study and I mean homosexuality as well. And so there have been some studies measuring erect penises and penile engorgement, that kind of thing, arousal patterns, and you strap people to a chair and put pornography on in front of them and
electrodes on their heads and stuff.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to see that the earlier methods, though they were quite rudimentary, were probably a little bit more appropriate, probably a lot more appropriate to how I would like bisexually represented in the world, is self-identification and self-reporting of experiences and attraction and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting that it's kind of taken a really big dive at some point, and then it's come back up and it's starting to do those things again now.
Yeah. All right, let's look at some more bi plus advocates that we think are biconic. I've got a local one. And so working in the sexual health and HIV space, there's one person who I always draw on who wrote quite a few articles on HIV AIDS in the early 90s. So back when the AIDS pandemic, the AIDS crisis was still going on. Of course, the pandemic is still going on today, but we have wonderful medication that keeps it all under control. Now, his name is Scott Anderson, and Scott wrote in the early 90s just some core principles that we think would make sense, like having a person-centered response, like having the acknowledgement of all the different genders and sexes of bi people and their partners, the involvement, the key involvement, the meaningful involvement of bi plus people in the HIV response. And these were things called for in the early 90s and were just basically completely ignored. And it's still stuff that bi plus sexual health advocates like me today are sort of saying. We've been asking for this for 30 years. But the good news is that it's changing. Like it's changing, which is so exciting to watch. But it's due to advocates like Scott in the early 90s that I even have the language to be able to draw on. And it's kind of reassuring as well to know that the frustrations that we feel today are frustrations that have always been felt. Something like sort of reassuring.
I'm not sure if that I'm not sure if that unites us or if it's disappointing that or if it's disappointing that, oh man, has nothing happened?
Totally.
Where's the progress? I think it's a mix of both.
Yeah, I think maybe in a way I mean it like I'm on the right path. I know I'm thinking in the right way. My focus is in the right place, because as advocates, you're sort of wondering all the time, is what I'm doing useful? Is it relevant? Is it going to create change, or am I just sort of yelling into the void? Like I sometimes think I'm people who know The Simpsons, old man yelling at the cloud. I always sometimes feel like I'm an old man yelling at the clouds.
Yeah.
And then when you see like, oh, what I'm doing or what we are doing is actually part of a rich history of bi advocacy throughout the decades, you're like, oh no, we're on the same track. We're doing the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned before that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we said last episode, and I'll probably continue to say it into the future episodes, is we look to our past to understand how we can move into our future. And so I'd love to talk about some contemporary bi plus activists and their contributions to the work that we do and to our community.
Yeah. So when I'm asked this question, like, who are the bi people around now that inspire you? It's literally the people that I know. It's literally the people at arm's length. You, Chad, the people at City Bi Plus Network, people that we know from overseas, Ross Victorious, R.K. Russell, just so many incredible voices who are one DM away on Instagram. And
Yeah.
that's one of the cool things as well, Chad, about, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but advocacy in the social media era is, it's not just a great platform, but it's a great way for you to network and a great way for you to connect with these people. And so it's really exciting that it's not the activists and the advocates that we see today aren't in some ivory tower. They're people just like you and me. They're people just like our listeners. They're just people making change in their little corner of the world. It's so awesome to watch.
That little corner of the world is so important, right? Like I see, let's say, I'll use you as an example. Let's say you go off and be the biggest, most wonderful bi advocate that there ever was, right? Let's say that is a possibility. The person who got you to that place were all these little people throughout your experience that said, hey, yeah, come on in, come join our community. Or, hey, you'd be really great on this podcast. Or, hey, I'd love for you to write an article. And so like, or maybe you've interviewed someone for their experience, those types of things. So each person doesn't have to go off and change the world, right? But don't doubt that every single person has an impact that is global, and it has an impact that is so far beyond their local reach and their community that it really makes waves. It's kind of that pebble in the water kind of thing, right? Or the butterfly effect, where something so seemingly small can impact so many people by just you turning up and being wonderful and authentic and thoughtful. You could really set in motion some really big change down the line.
Yeah. And I think actually at the end of the day, like you said, like doesn't have to be, you can have global reach, but I find probably the most powerful form of advocacy for us is to be out and to be that lighthouse in where you are. Because
absolutely.
Knowing you can change the lives of people around you. So when I came out, I thought I was the only queer in my family. Within a few years, it turns out my dad, my sister, and my two half brothers were all bisexual, just like me. And they only came out because I came out. You can create waves in your just around you and globally, and things that you do, you never know where they might be picked up, or you never know who might hear you. Being at a bar and using the B word loudly, having a little pin on your backpack, walking down the street, you can change someone's life just walking past them. It's powerful stuff, Chad.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the little pin one. Anytime I see someone wearing a little pin, or some of the other markers that just like are true to my experience, like, I see you, I love you.
What are some other markers, Chad?
Some other markers, Doc Martens. Some Doc Martens. No, there's a few, but I mean, I'd take them with all a bit of a grain of salt, obviously. But
totally.
it's so true. The idea that you are making an impression always is so important, and like you hear that in a professional career kind of environment, but it's true in this space as well. Just being out is political, and it is revolutionary to let people in. And I'm out, and I'm proud, and I'm loud, and I have people messaging me every other week and saying, "Oh, hey, I am," or people bring it up in conversation, and at the end of the conversation, "Oh, actually, by the way, can you not tell people just because you're the only person that knows?" They just felt so comfortable around me to like say it. I was like, "Oh, wow. Okay." Like in this moment, you got to be yourself for a hot minute, and it's super cool. I'd love to highlight some other contemporary names and voices. We mentioned last week Robin Oakes, our bi mother. Robin Oakes has written and contributed to a few books, and is a fantastic advocate, and it sits on the board and in different organizations. So please please look up Robin Oakes. Julia Shaw has written a really fantastic book called Bi, The Hidden Culture, History, and Science of Bisexuality. It's a fantastic read. It's a really great 101. If you just want to kind of catch up and get up to speed on all that there is and has been about bisexuality and in one nice little package, it's a fantastic book. Here we are.
Show and tell people again.
Show and tell. I've got mine just here as well. Yeah. Yeah. Lois Shearing, they are absolutely fantastic. I first came across Lois because they had posted the Bisexual Manifesto on Twitter, which was fantastic for me as a baby bi, about how to turn up and how to demand more from people, particularly other queer organizations that don't recognize bisexuality as much as they should. Vaneet Mehta is fantastic. Yes. Author of Bisexual Men Exist. You would have seen that go all across Instagram and Twitter when that launched. We have some really fantastically creative and thoughtful and passionate people putting out good work, and supporting that good work allows them to do more good work. So this is a humble plug. If you are out there and you like to read, if you like to consume art, if you like to consume anything at all, if you recognize that there is something that is particularly for community or education or anything like that, please download it, consume it, buy it, listen to it, stream it, hit add to favorite, share to a friend. It really boosts everyone. And the more that those things boost, the more people see it and the more people we can affect and help, really. Which is, I guess, kind of talking to one of our next points is like, what is the future of bi activism? Like we have new technology like social media and all these different ways to connect with people. What is the future that you see, Steve, when it comes to bi advocacy and activism?
That was a very pointed Steve.
What do you see, Steve?
Yeah, like
answer my question,
I
Steve.
feel like I've been caught. No, I've dropped something. All right, let me look into my crystal ball.
I can take it again if you want a little chiller.
No. My turn. Look, the future, we already see so many bi plus communities being built online, and I think that trend is going to continue really strongly. Another thing for people wanting to connect, online communities are really powerful. The use of them as platforms and as ways to connect will just continue to grow in significance and an impact. I think, we'd be remiss to not bring in the A word, AI. Yeah, I think AI will have a really powerful role to play in advocacy in the very near future, if not right now. The use of it, because so often such a huge barrier for access to advocacy, and we really have to acknowledge that there are barriers to accessing advocacy and having the tools, the language, the knowledge, all of that sort of stuff. AI can really be a powerful leveler for that sort of thing. It can be used for nefarious purposes as well, but it can be used by advocates to help create whatever advocacy that they want to bring into the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tool. Yeah.
Yeah, AI is interesting. There's kind of two sides of it, and I want to acknowledge that there are some shortcomings when it comes to AI, and these are models that are trained off existing language and existing content and media. So we as a community haven't been visible. We haven't had our histories documented. We haven't had these things be available for training data for AI. And so, and that's like just scratching the surface. When we start talking about intersectional communities, it's far, far, far worse. And so it's important to acknowledge that AI is fallible, right? And so the more that we are vocal and the more that we are visible, the more AI can start to see data that represents us and train on that data. And I know that people have issue with AI and training data, but that is a reality that we need to acknowledge. But then, yeah, to your point, Steve, AI is a resource. And when you think about things like ChatGPT, our communities don't have funding. We don't have resources. We don't have people who we don't have admin staff. We don't have clerics or anything that
we are all those things in one.
I say cleric. I meant to say clerk. We probably have some clerics. We probably have some clerics out there. But yeah, like we don't have structured organizations where we've got a marketing budget and a grant writing team and a website copywriter or any of those things. So it's really important that, like, for those people who are in the know and have the capacity and the capability to perhaps get a handle on tools like ChatGPT and use them to try and prop up our community. That's just one thing. But social media is the obvious other technology. You mentioned people finding each other on social media, but there are other ways to kind of take those audiences off those channels. Social media is fantastic, but we don't own those channels. And the second someone means us harm or just is maybe a bit naive to our experience, if they say, hey, I don't like this page, I don't like this group, I don't like this, and insert something here, you could lose an entire following like that and you won't get it back. That is very real. I've seen it happen to many people. So trying to take those communities and audiences offline to email newsletters, to local in-person community events is really important as well. Obviously, it's not the only thing. We love social media, but it's important to try and connect with people offline as well.
Yeah. Well, you and I, Chad, went on a little date last weekend.
We did.
Very cute. To one of our local Bi Plus community meetups. It was just down at a pub. There were dozens of us. And I tell you what, we walked away with 10 new best friends.
We did. You did.
So
I commandeered your new best friends to be friends.
Like I said, put me to pasture. I'm ready to go to bed. You could take it from here. I'll wheel them in and you can take it.
Done.
But it's that sort of stuff. Like, as much as we are terminally online, in person is just so brilliant. And if you feel safe in those environments, if you're lucky enough to have those environments in your local area, but also, Chad, this is where the famous phrase, be the change you want to see. If you can, you should. Run with it.
Buy the change you want to be.
Buy the change. Buy. If you just change every word, it works. If you don't have a local group, start one.
Amen.
If you are too scared to start it in person, start an online community in your local area first, then take it offline.
Yeah. That's what we're doing right now. We recognize that there was potentially a gap in podcast and video and audio content that was specific to Australian bisexual people in that want to be, I guess, a little bit more active and a little bit more engaged. And here we are now with the Give It To Me Bi podcast. That's not to take away or detract from other podcasts that are more story driven or more lived experience driven. We need those. That's kind of not what we are doing. We're doing this more kind of activist advocacy kind of pitch, right? There's niches and nuance, and that everyone can feel, and everyone should feel empowered and comfortable to feel that.
Yeah. As soon as you get a lot of imposter syndrome. I think we all know what that feels like. But you get it as an advocate as well. And you're like, am I doing anything meaningful? But as soon as, like, the second you learn, like, oh, I can be the change, I can create that Facebook group, I can create that meetup at a local pub, I can do these things, you really, once you get a feel for that, and your own power and know that you can do those things, baby, welcome. Like, run with that feeling, because you're really capable of lots of wonderful things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful to connect with people in more kind of niche communities. Maybe it's not a bi general community. Maybe it's a bi gamers community. Maybe it's a bi even more niche, bi D&D. You know what I mean? There could be so many niche ways to meet people that are more specific to your interests.
Reminds me of someone I know, Chad.
I've been trying to start a D&D party. Guys, hit me up. But also there's a lot to be said about meeting people that aren't necessarily exactly like you but still within the community. There's a lot to be learnt from shared histories and lived experiences of other people that are different to you. So, if you're comfortable, take that leap, meet people. I never go out. I never go to in-person events. Not ever. Rarely. I have a young child. I'm always tired. Also, I just love being online. so I'm always at home. Steve forced me out of the house. It was wonderful. I met so many new people that I already adore. So yeah.
Yeah. And like, I don't drink, but so I go to a pub. I had my lemonade, had a good steak. You know, you're there to meet people. You're there to enjoy yourself. You know, it's scary for sure. I was nervous, Chad. Like I've been
Me too
for a while now, right? And even I'm nervous walking through that gate, being like, what am I walking into?
Yeah.
But the second you get down, you realize everyone else feels the exact same way. We're all complete dweebs on this rock spinning through space.
Yeah.
Let's chat. And yeah. It's
absolutely. Yeah.
And that's how, like, this is sort of how we met. And then look at all the incredible work that you know, we've managed to do over the years. And we've seen that through so many people, so many local advocates as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
magic happens in connection. I'm gonna say that again because I fumbled that. Magic really exists in connecting with other people, and there's so much that can happen between one person and another person, and amplifying that is usually only ever a good thing.
And as a bi person, connecting with another bi person is in itself a form of powerful advocacy. It's a force that only the gods could really muster up. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Now, I guess we would be remiss to not mention that on our activism and community episode, we are launching a online community that you are free to join. It is absolutely free. We have a Facebook group, the Give It To Me Bi podcast Facebook group. The links are in the show notes. We also have the Give It To Me Bi newsletter where you can keep up to date with all things podcast. You can connect with us, suggest content ideas, get into big debates and discussions with other people in the community about things that are important to you, that are important to community. It's a really wonderful way to meet people. Steve and I met in a very similar capacity, and so would implore you to join if you're interested, if you're so inclined. You can turn the notifications off if it's too much, but it'll be nice to have you. We look forward to seeing you there. Welcome along.
Yeah. And, you know, Chad, we want people to be part of this podcast. So if you have ideas, tell me what merch you want me to buy and showcase at the start of our episode, because apparently that's my thing.
Or tell us what merch you want us to make. We can have podcast merch.
Yeah. Tell us what books you want us to read, what books you want us to feature, any artwork. You know, we really want this to be a space for all of us, because we're nothing within our community. And so I'm really looking forward to showcasing our wonderful, awesome community.
Yeah, unreal. Well, that about wraps it up for today's episode. No? Wrap up?
Yeah.
That about wraps it up for today's episode. Next week, we are talking all about generational change and the growth of bisexuality. We believe children are the future, is the famous saying.
I sleep well at night knowing what's coming around the corner.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I don't sleep well at night. That's other things. Yes. There's a lot of really good chat and conversation around young community, young bi individuals, and how the youth are identifying, which is really exciting. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, please share with a friend. It really helps us out. Leave a review or just listen to it once and throw your phone against the wall. I don't know. It'd be really nice if you could follow us along in the Facebook group, sign up to the newsletter, and perhaps tell us who your bi activist heroes are. Share your stories with us in the group.
Thank you, everyone, very much. Love you all. Make sure you follow us, follow Daddy Chad's directions, and we can't wait for you to join us next episode.